Oerlikon 20mm. The Oerlikon 20mm was the final line of defense between a sailor and a watery grave. While heavy guns handled distant threats, this rapid-fire autocannon dealt with anything that slipped through the cracks. It could spit out 450 rounds per minute, creating a literal wall of lead around American carriers. In the heat of the Pacific Theater, this weapon became a lifesaver against the terrifying kamikaze attacks. Imagine a wall of fire so dense that a wooden aircraft would simply disintegrate before even touching the steel hull of a ship. By 1945, some battleships were bristling with over 100 of these mounts, turning the deck into a fortress. Actually, the Oerlikon accounted for 32% of all Japanese aircraft downed by the U.S. Navy between 1941 and 1944. Its simplicity allowed even green sailors to operate it effectively under extreme pressure. It wasn't just a gun, it was the heartbeat of naval survival in the face of certain death. Flak-Vierling 38 2cm. Facing a low-flying Allied ground attack plane required more than just a single barrel. It demanded a mechanical buzzsaw. Germany provided exactly that by grouping 4 2cm cannons onto a single high-speed mount, known as the Flak-Vierling 38. This terrifying quad-mount system could fill the sky with a combined 800 rounds per minute, creating a localized storm of high-explosive steel. No other low-altitude defense struck more fear into the hearts of Mustang or Thunderbolt pilots. Because of its 4-barrel spread, even a minor adjustment by the gunner would send a massive curtain of fire directly into an oncoming aircraft's flight path. The Germans often hid these systems on half-tracks or railway cars, turning every supply line into a potential death trap for unsuspecting Allied scouts. Cripple an engine was easy with a single 2cm shell, but the Flak-Vierling rarely fired just one. It slammed dozens of projectiles into a target in a single, sustained burst. In one brutal engagement, a single Flak-Vierling battery reportedly swatted 6 Allied fighters out of the sky in less than 10 minutes. It remains the ultimate proof that at low altitudes, the overwhelming volume of fire is the only metric that truly matters. Bofors 40mm. Winning the title of the war's most successful anti-aircraft gun is a tall order, but the Bofors 40mm claims it with ease. By firing a 2-pound high-explosive shell up to a ceiling of 23,000 feet, this Swedish-designed masterpiece bridged the dangerous gap between light machine guns and heavy artillery. It became the mandatory gold standard for the U.S. Navy, tasked with one mission: stop the enemy before they release their bombs. Deadliness in the Bofors came from a flawless marriage of raw power and rapid fire. Operating at 120 rounds per minute, every shell utilized a sensitive impact fuse that converted a simple hit into a catastrophic structural failure. This wasn't a weapon designed to scare pilots away. It was a precision tool built for total aerial disintegration. During the chaos of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Bofors gunners acted as the final, impenetrable wall for American carriers. Chrysler's production lines shattered every record to churn out over 60,000 units, a desperate pace required to feed the endless hunger of the Pacific Theater. So legendary was its effectiveness that even today modernized variants of this 1930s design continue to serve in frontline militaries across the globe. 37mm Flak 3637. Think of the 37mm Flak 36 as a sledgehammer where the 20mm was merely a needle. Occupying the critical middle ground of German air defense, this weapon delivered significantly more destructive force than light autocannons without sacrificing too much speed. German crews relied on its heavy punch to dismantle rugged, armored Allied ground attackers like the Soviet Il-2 Sturmovik. Hurling a 1.4-pound projectile at 160 rounds per minute, the Flak 36 effectively controlled the sky up to 15,700 feet. At this altitude, it could catch dive bombers in their most vulnerable state, long before they reached their release points. A single direct hit from this 37mm beast didn't just damage a wing, it often severed it entirely, forcing the aircraft into a violent, unrecoverable tailspin. Mobility was the hidden genius of its design, leading the Germans to mount these cannons on truck beds and armored half-tracks. These mobile units shadowed panzer divisions across Europe, providing a continuous umbrella of safety against harassing Allied fighters. The moment that 37mm started barking, Allied pilots knew their window for a successful strike had just slammed shut. A QF 2-pounder pom-pom. Stepping onto the deck of a British Royal Navy cruiser, you'd likely encounter the legendary QF 2-pounder. Better known by its rhythmic nickname, the pom-pom, this wasn't just a gun but a complex engineering marvel. Its nickname came from the very specific, heavy, thudding sound it made while firing, a sound that haunted the nightmares of Axis pilots. The British typically used these in massive 8-barrel mounts, which could hurl nearly 800 rounds per minute combined. This staggering density of fire effectively deleted the section of sky where the aircraft was trying to fly. Each 40mm shell weighed exactly 2 pounds and carried enough explosive filler to ruin any pilot's day. There was simply no room for evasive maneuvers. While it had a shorter effective range of about 11,000 feet, its sheer volume of fire at close range was unparalleled. It served as the primary shield for icons like the HMS Hood and the King George V class battleships. When a full battery opened up, the horizon looked less like a sky and more like a wall of exploding steel. 85mm 52K. In the Soviet Union, weapons needed to be two things, simple and brutal. The 85mm 52K anti-aircraft gun was the personification of this philosophy, developed in 1939 to serve as the iron backbone of high-altitude defense. It was capable of hurling a massive 20-pound shell to a staggering altitude of 34,000 feet. This raw power was the primary reason German bomber crews found the airspace over Moscow and Stalingrad so incredibly lethal and unforgiving. However, the true genius of the 52K wasn't just in how it looked at the sky, but how it looked at the horizon during the desperate German invasion. Soviet commanders quickly realized that this high-velocity gun possessed the kinetic energy required to pierce the thickest German armor with terrifying ease. In a legendary display of versatility, the 52K proved so effective at stopping heavy Tiger tanks that it fundamentally changed Soviet armored doctrine forever. Soviet engineers eventually took the entire barrel design and crammed it into the turret of the T-34-85 tank, creating a mobile hunter. Over 14,000 units of the 52K were produced, spearheading the massive counteroffensive that eventually pushed the front lines all the way to Berlin. It represents a masterclass in survivalist engineering, a weapon born to clear the skies that ended up ruling the land through sheer, unadulterated force. QF 3.7-inch AA gun. While the German 88 gets all the glory, the British QF 3.7-inch was the silent guardian that actually held the line during the darkest days of the Blitz. This was Britain's heavy hitter. It didn't just fire, it punched holes in the Luftwaffe's formations with a 28-pound shell. The sheer vertical reach of this weapon was staggering, with late-war variants like the Mark VI pushing an incredible ceiling of 59,000 feet. That is nearly double the effective altitude of early German counterparts. During the frantic defense of London, these batteries were the only thing standing between civilian neighborhoods and total annihilation. It wasn't just about the height, though. Accuracy was the real killer. When linked to the advanced GL Mark III radar and early predictors, the 3.7-inch could track and engage targets through thick fog and pitch-black nights with surgical precision. British crews worked in grueling shifts, often firing until the barrels were literally glowing red. By 1944, the introduction of proximity fuses turned this gun into a nightmare for the V-1 flying bombs. It transformed the sky into a minefield that no pilot or missile could navigate safely. It was the heavy-duty insurance policy that ensured London stayed standing while the world burned around it. Type 10 120mm Japan's air defense was often a desperate game of catch-up, but the Type 10 120mm was their genuine attempt at a giant slayer. Most Japanese guns struggled to even see the American B-29 Super Fortresses flying at 30,000 feet, not this one. The Type 10 was a naval beast brought inland, specifically designed to reach up and swat those high-altitude silver plates out of the clouds. With a maximum vertical reach of 36,000 feet, it was one of the few weapons in the Japanese arsenal that could actually force a B-29 pilot to sweat. The shells were massive, weighing over 45 pounds each. They didn't just explode, they vaporized anything within their blast radius. Because these guns were expensive and difficult to manufacture, Japan could only deploy them around critical targets like Tokyo or the Kure Naval Base. The rarity of the Type 10 made every single shot a high-stakes gamble for the Empire. Imagine being a B-29 crewman, thinking you are safe in the thin air of the stratosphere, only to see the massive black puffs of 120mm flak appearing right outside your cockpit window. It was a terrifying reminder that even at the edge of space, the Japanese could still reach out and touch you. While they lacked the advanced radar of the West, the sheer brute force of the Type 10 kept the American 20th Air Force on constant edge during their long-range bombing campaigns. 8.8 centimeter flak 1836. There is no weapon in World War II more iconic or more feared than the German 88. It is the Swiss Army knife of destruction. Originally designed to clear the skies, the 8.8 centimeter flak quickly became a legend for a terrifying reason. It could kill anything it looked at. Whether it was a B-17 Flying Fortress at 26,000 feet or a British Matilda tank 2 miles away, the 88 didn't care. It just erased them from existence. The secret was the high muzzle velocity. And the shell left the barrel at 2,690 feet per second, traveling with such flat trajectory and force that it felt like a laser beam. In the deserts of North Africa, Rommel famously used these guns to bait Allied tanks into a trap. He would hide the 88s in shallow pits, wait for the British armor to get close, and then systematically turn every single tank into a burning scrap heap before they even realized they were being shot at. In the air defense role, the 88 was the backbone of the flak belts protecting the Third Reich. A battery of 4 guns could put up a synchronized box of fire that forced Allied bombers to fly through a literal gauntlet of jagged steel. The psychological impact was so profound that Allied soldiers began attributing almost every explosion to an 88, even if it was just a common field gun. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a universal symbol of German engineering at its most lethal. With over 20,000 produced, it influenced every battlefield from the streets of Stalingrad to the beaches of Normandy. It remains the gold standard for what an anti-aircraft gun can achieve when pushed to its absolute limit. 90mm anti-aircraft gun M1, M2, M3. While the rest of the world was still relying on a gunner's eyesight and steady hand, the United States decided to automate the kill. The 90mm gun wasn't just a barrel and a breech, it was the muscular arm of a sophisticated robotic brain. By 1944, this weapon system functioned through an invisible web of data. The SCR-584 radar would lock onto a target, feeding live coordinates into an M9 director, a mechanical computer that solved complex ballistic equations in real time. The result was a gun that could track, lead, and fire upon an enemy plane with zero human intervention in the aiming process. This 15-foot tall titan could hurl a 23-pound shell to a ceiling of 33,500 feet, far above where most bombers felt safe. but its versatility was its most terrifying trait. When the German panzers broke through the lines in late 1944, the 90mm was lowered to point-blank range. It possessed enough kinetic energy to punch a hole straight through the front plate of a Tiger tank from over half a mile away. This weapon marked the end of an era where luck played a role in air defense. It turned the sky into a calculated grid of destruction, where math was more dangerous than the gunpowder itself. But 12.8-centimeter Flak 40. Germany's response to the relentless Allied bombing campaigns was the construction of gargantuan concrete fortresses called flak towers. Perched atop these structures was the Flak 40, a 13-ton monster of heavy engineering that made the famous 88 look like a toy. It was so heavy that the military gave up on making it mobile, choosing instead to bolt it to the foundations of cities like Berlin. Each twin-mounted battery could saturate the atmosphere with 57-pound shells that reached a staggering 48,500 feet into the stratosphere. The sheer scale of the explosion was the Flak 40's calling card. A single shell contained enough high explosives to create a lethal pressure wave capable of snapping a heavy bomber in half without a direct hit. A 4-gun battery of these giants could create a localized zone of total atmospheric turbulence, making it physically impossible for an aircraft to maintain level flight. To feed this beast, an automated electric loading system rammed shells into the breech at a rate of 14 rounds per minute. Allied pilots reported seeing black bursts of smoke the size of entire buildings when these guns opened up. They weren't just defending a city, they were trying to rewrite the laws of physics in the upper atmosphere. The Flak 40 represented the absolute ceiling of heavy artillery, a brutal monument to the Third Reich's attempt to halt the inevitable collapse of their airspace. It was the most powerful conventional anti-aircraft weapon ever to see combat, standing as a final, terrifying barrier against the Allied firestorms. And proximity fuse. The most effective killer of the air war wasn't a giant cannon or a fast plane, but a tiny radio station tucked inside a shell. Before this invention, gunners had to guess a plane's altitude and set a mechanical timer on the fuse. It was a game of luck where thousands of shells were wasted for a single hit. The proximity fuse changed everything by using a miniature radar to detect the target, triggering a massive explosion the moment the shell got within 70 feet of an airplane. This was a scientific miracle hidden in plain sight. American engineers managed to shrink fragile vacuum tubes to the size of a fingernail, making them strong enough to survive the 20,000 Gs of being shot out of a 90mm cannon. This secret technology instantly tripled the effectiveness of every anti-aircraft battery in the Allied arsenal, turning near misses into guaranteed wreckage. It was a level of sophistication that the Axis powers simply could not replicate. When the Navy deployed this magic fuse in the Pacific, it decimated the waves of Japanese aircraft before they could even release their torpedoes. Later, in the snow-covered forests of Europe, it became the only weapon fast enough to knock the V-1 flying bombs out of the sky. General George S. Patton credited this small piece of glass and copper with winning the war for the Allies in Europe. If you found this breakdown of WW2's deadliest shields fascinating, hit that subscribe button to join our history-obsessed community. Thanks for watching until the very end.